My mother-in-law Judith was convinced that because my hands were clean, I was a parasite. In her world, a person's worth was etched in the calluses on their palms and the permanent dirt lodged under their fingernails. She believed real work was something that broke your body down, and since my labor happened behind the glow of a monitor, she saw me as a sophisticated grifter who had mesmerized her son, Michael, into financing a life of leisure. So when she emptied a steaming kettle of water onto my arm, it wasn't just an act of rage. In her mind, it was an exorcism. She thought she was cleansing her home of an infestation. What she didn't realize was that she was violently evicting the very person who was single-handedly funding her comfortable middle-class existence. She thought she was cutting off a leech. I was about to teach her that she had just butchered her own golden goose. My marriage to Michael was less of a partnership and more of a prolonged, futile audition for his mother's acceptance. From the day we said our vows, Judith made her contempt for me the wallpaper of our family life. She came from a generation where value was tangible. It was a well-tended garden, a perfectly baked pie, a floor scrubbed on hands and knees. The abstract world of digital strategy and code, the work I did from a small corner of our guest room, was not only foreign to her, it was fraudulent. It was a scam the lazy used to trick the hardworking. I wasn't a businesswoman, I was a professional freeloader who had ensnared her wonderful, industrious son. The reality was so far from her bitter narrative that it would have been comical if it hadn't been so poisonous. From that cluttered corner, I ran a niche technology consulting firm. I specialized in designing and deploying custom artificial intelligence solutions for private equity firms in New York and tech incubators on the West Coast. It was mentally grueling, high-stakes work that required absolute precision and consumed most of my waking hours. The income I generated in a single quarter dwarfed what she and Michael made in an entire year, but I never mentioned it. I loved my husband, and I foolishly believed that love was enough to weather the storm. Michael, of course, knew the truth, but he treated my success like a shameful family secret, something to be hidden away. His entire life strategy was built on the foundation of conflict avoidance. "Just let it go, Sarah," he would plead, his smile limp and apologetic. "You know how she is. She's old-fashioned. She'll eventually come around." But she never did. Her resentment was a slow-acting poison that contaminated every interaction. It was in the theatrical sighs she'd make about the utility bills whenever she saw my multiple monitors powered on. It was the time she accidentally unplugged the main internet router during a critical client presentation, claiming she smelled something burning and that we needed to be more careful with the electricity. My workspace was a monument to her disrespect. It wasn't an office, it was a cheap desk wedged between a stationary bike that doubled as a clothes rack and a closet bursting with her out-of-season coats. My computer hobby, as she called it, wasn't worthy of its own room. She would barge in without knocking, her eyes sweeping over my equipment with undisguised suspicion before launching into a monologue about how Michael's ex-girlfriend, a wonderful, respectable dental assistant, had a real job and contributed to society. On that final morning, my alarm chimed long before the dawn. I had a make-or-break video conference with a new client based in London. I slipped into my cramped workspace, the glow of my screens a small sanctuary in the oppressive quiet of the house. For hours, I was immersed in a world of complex algorithms, predictive analytics, and multi-million-dollar contracts. I successfully closed the deal, feeling that deep, satisfying thrum of a difficult job executed perfectly. Energized and craving a celebratory cup of tea, I closed my laptop, sending up a silent prayer that I could make it to the kitchen and back without an incident. My luck had officially run out. Judith was standing guard by the kitchen counter, her arms folded across the chest of a worn floral housecoat. Her face was a thundercloud of resentment. The instant I entered, her gaze locked onto me, and I felt that familiar heavy blanket of exhaustion descend. I tried to project an aura of serene indifference as I moved past her to the electric kettle. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she started, her voice a low sneer. "It's nearly 9 o'clock. Most of us have been up for hours doing actual work." I took a slow, deliberate breath, keeping my back to her. "Good morning, Judith. I've been on a call with London since 4:30 this morning." She released a short, derisive bark of a laugh. "A call, please. Tapping away on that little glowing box of yours isn't work. It's a game. My son Michael is out there navigating rush hour traffic to get to a real job, putting in a hard day's labor to keep a roof over our heads, while you sit in your pajamas and play on the internet. You have absolutely no concept of shame." It was her favorite song, a tune I'd heard 1,000 times. A fierce, desperate urge rose in me to spin around and detonate the truth. I wanted to pull up my bank statements and shove the phone in her face. I wanted to explain in excruciating detail that my little game not only paid for the premium cable package she watched all day, but also covered the mortgage on the very house she was standing in. My income wasn't a supplement, it was the entire financial bedrock of the life she lorded over me, but I swallowed the words. What was the point? In the movie playing in her head, I was the villain and she wasn't interested in the script. So I said nothing, reaching for my favorite mug from the cabinet. The kettle on the counter gave a soft click, signaling it was done. As I reached for it, Judith moved with a startling, violent swiftness. She snatched the kettle from its base. Before my mind could even register her intent, she swung it in a vicious arc, and a wave of scalding water crashed against my forearm. A white-hot, blinding pain erupted across my skin. It was an agony so pure and absolute it felt as though my flesh was being melted away. A scream tore from my throat, raw and involuntary, as I stumbled back, clutching my arm to my chest. The pain was nauseating, making the room spin. Through a haze of tears, I saw my skin turn a shocking mottled red, the first blisters already rising like angry little islands. I stared at her, my entire being reeling in shock. I scanned her face for a flicker of regret, a trace of horror at what she'd done. There was nothing. Her expression was one of cold, victorious satisfaction, her lips pulled back into a triumphant sneer. "There!" she spat, her voice laced with ice. "Maybe that will give you a taste of what real pain feels like." At that exact moment, we heard the thunder of feet on the stairs. Michael burst into the kitchen, his face a mess of sleep-rumpled confusion. He saw me sobbing and cradling my blistering arm. He saw his mother standing there with the empty kettle, steam still rising from the puddle on the floor. His eyes, wide and panicked, darted between the two of us. Before he could speak, Judith turned on him, her voice escalating into a shrill command. "She has to go, Michael. I will not tolerate a lazy, disrespectful freeloader in my house a moment longer. Get her out, now!" And in that instant, something inside of me didn't just break, it atomized. It wasn't just the searing pain in my arm or the venom in her words. It was Michael's silence, his profound, suffocating, damning silence. He just stood there, a statue of cowardice, as his mother assaulted his wife and ordered me from our home. He didn't rush to help me, he didn't scream at her, he didn't defend me. He was paralyzed, a puppet whose strings she had pulled his entire life. His silence wasn't inaction, it was a choice. In the single most important moment of our marriage, he had chosen her. A strange glacial calm flowed over me, extinguishing the fire of my pain and rage. I looked at his weak, pathetic face, then at Judith's smug, hateful one, and I did the one thing they never imagined I would. I turned, walked straight past my husband without a word, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool morning air. She thought she had just won a decisive battle. She had no idea she had just handed me a formal declaration of war, a war I was now prepared to win. The crisp air on my skin was a shock, but it did nothing to cool the fire on my arm or the permafrost that had just formed around my heart. Walking down that driveway, my mind was a maelstrom of betrayal. How had I let it get this bad? I had spent years making excuses for her cruelty and rationalizing Michael's spinelessness, all for a peace that was never real. I had allowed them to shrink me, to make me feel like an unwelcome guest in the life that I was secretly bankrolling. My hand was shaking uncontrollably, but I managed to get my phone out and call my best friend, Olivia. The second she heard the strangled sob that was all I could manage, she snapped into action. "Sarah, what is it? What happened? Where are you?" "I need you," I choked out. She burned me with boiling water. I left. I just need to go somewhere." "I'm on my way," Olivia said, her voice turning to pure steel. "Leaving my desk right now. Text me your location. Do not, under any circumstances, go back in that house." An hour later, I was sitting in Olivia's immaculate apartment, the adrenaline finally ebbing away to leave a deep, throbbing agony in its place. She took one look at my arm and her expression morphed from deep concern to white-hot fury. "You have to be joking. That woman is a monster. Okay, first we're going to an urgent care clinic, then you're calling your lawyer." As she gently treated the burn with a soothing gel and wrapped my arm in sterile gauze, she let loose a string of curses about Judith that was both creatively vicious and deeply comforting to my shattered soul. When I laid out the entire story, the years of thinly veiled insults, the attack, and most importantly, Michael's paralyzed silence, Olivia's eyes were like chips of flint. "He just stood there?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "He let his mother commit a felony and then kick you out of the house you pay for? That's it, Sarah. You're done. This is over. Do you understand me?" Some small broken part of me, the part conditioned to keep the peace, wanted to argue, but looking at my bandaged arm, feeling the fresh gaping wound of my husband's final betrayal, I knew she was right. The woman who had walked out of that house was not the same one who had woken up in it that morning. The quiet, accommodating Sarah had been burned away. I had built a business, a small empire with my own mind and my own grit. I was successful, I was powerful, and I had been letting two small, deeply miserable people treat me like I was nothing. That night, in the quiet sanctuary of Olivia's guest room, I made a silent promise to myself. I wasn't just going to move on, I was going to build a new life so radiant and successful that its light would serve as a permanent, blinding reminder of everything they had so casually and cruelly thrown away. The next morning, I woke with a chilling clarity of purpose. My arm was a constant, aching reminder of the past, but my mind was a finely honed weapon aimed directly at the future. I sat at Olivia's kitchen island with her laptop and began the systematic deconstruction of my former life. My first call was to my corporate attorney, a sharp, formidable woman I kept on retainer. Years ago, on her advice, I had structured my business as a sole proprietorship, keeping all its finances completely separate from our marital assets. Michael and Judith had sneered at the move, calling it cold and untrusting. It turned out to be the smartest decision of my life. "I need divorce papers drawn up," I told my lawyer, my voice steady. "Grounds are spousal abuse and irreconcilable differences. I want them served to my husband at his place of work as soon as possible." Next, I accessed my business accounts. I initiated the final transfer that closed a major deal with a venture capital fund in San Francisco. A payment for a substantial 7-figure sum appeared in my business account. I immediately wired a large portion of it into a new personal account Michael had no knowledge of. Then, I went online and began my search for a new home. I wasn't just looking for an apartment, I was looking for a fortress. I found a magnificent penthouse apartment in a historic building in Beacon Hill with sweeping views of the Boston Common and floor-to-ceiling windows that bathed the space in light. I submitted the application and paid the security deposit and first 3 months' rent online before I had even finished my coffee. By late afternoon, my phone, which I had silenced, started vibrating insistently on the counter. It was Michael. I let the first 3 calls go to voicemail. On the 4th, I answered and waited, letting the silence hang in the air. Sarah, where on earth are you?" His voice was tight. Not with worry, but with sheer irritation. "You can't just take off like this. My mother is an absolute wreck." A short, bitter laugh escaped me. A wreck? Or just angry that her favorite punching bag walked out? And are you talking about the house where your mother assaulted me with a weapon while you just stood there and watched? Is that the home you're referring to? He started to stammer, his arrogant tone finally cracking. I was shocked. I froze. "You know what she's like when she gets upset." "What she's like?" I snapped, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "She's a violent criminal, and you, Michael, are a coward. You let her demean me for years. You stood by while she called me a useless parasite, all while my internet hobby was bringing in over $500,000 a year. And you have the gall to call me annoyed that I left?" There was a profound, stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the rusty gears of his small, self-centered world grinding to a halt. What did you just say? $500,000? A cold, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. "That's the part that got your attention, isn't it? You never really asked, did you, Michael? You were happy to let your mother abuse me because her narrative made you feel superior. You were comfortable with your ignorance. Well, here's a dose of reality for you. While you were supporting the family on your $65,000 salary, I was clearing that much almost every month. The mortgage on that house, the payments on your precious SUV, your season tickets to the Celtics, our trips to Nantucket, that was all me. The silence on his end was now thick with a dawning, sickening horror. $500,000 a year? He whispered, the word sounding foreign and brittle. That's right, I said, feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated power. And as of this morning, the Bank of Sarah is permanently closed. I'm filing for divorce. The papers should arrive at your office tomorrow. I've already secured a new place to live, and I have scheduled movers to retrieve my personal and professional property later this week. I suggest you have it packed and ready. Do not contact me again. Panic finally erupted from him. Sarah, wait! Please don't do this! We can talk. I'll make her apologize. I swear to God, I will force her to apologize. We can fix this. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh this time, but it was hollow and sharp as broken glass. You want to fix it now? Now that you understand the financial cost of what you lost? It's far too late for that, Michael. You made your choice when you stood there and did nothing. Now I'm making mine. I ended the call, cutting off his desperate, pathetic pleas. Olivia walked into the room, a huge, proud grin spreading across her face. That, she declared, was a work of art. I leaned back on her couch, taking a deep, shuddering breath that felt like the first clean air I had taken in years. Oh, that was just the appetizer, I said, a dangerous sparkle in my eye. They have no idea what's coming for the main course. The day the movers arrived at my old house, I was supervising the installation of custom-built bookshelves in my new penthouse library. I had provided the moving company with a surgically precise list. My entire wardrobe and book collection, every piece of my office, the original art I had purchased, and the high-end Swiss coffee machine Judith had commandeered. The crew supervisor called me when they were finished. He told me Judith had a complete screaming meltdown on the front lawn, accusing me of being a thief. Michael, he said, just stood on the porch looking ashen and hollowed out. His voicemails in the following days were a pathetic, predictable carousel of begging and blaming. You're tearing this family apart over one little misunderstanding, he shouted in one message. You're the selfish one, Sarah. You're just proving my mother right about you. I listened to it once, feeling a strange clinical detachment, then deleted his entire call history and blocked his number. Life in the penthouse was a rebirth. I was surrounded by light, beauty, and most importantly, silence. My business flourished without the background hum of constant resentment. I felt my own spirit, which had been so compressed for so long, finally begin to stretch and heal. But I knew there was one last act in this drama. I needed to see her face one more time. I needed that perfect final moment of closure. I learned from a mutual acquaintance that Judith was a regular attendee of the New England Benefactors Gala. It was the premier social event of the season for Boston's old money families and new money tech titans. For Judith, it was an opportunity to wear a dress she couldn't afford and pretend she belonged. It was the perfect stage. I didn't just buy a ticket. My company became a platinum-level sponsor of the event. On the night of the gala, I took my time. I wore a custom-made gown the color of midnight blue, which shimmered under the chandeliers. Around my neck was a simple, elegant diamond necklace I had bought myself as a declaration of independence. When I walked into the grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza, I felt a subtle shift in the room's energy. Heads turned, people whispered. I was no longer the quiet, unassuming wife from the suburbs. I was someone. And then I saw her. Judith was standing near the bar, clutching a glass of house Chardonnay, laughing a bit too loudly with a circle of other women. Her eyes were roaming the room, hungry for any sign of recognition, and then they landed on me. The brittle laugh died on her lips. Her expression cycled through confusion to disbelief, to a slow dawning wave of sheer panic. I let her marinate in it for a moment. Then I began a slow, deliberate walk across the polished marble floor. I moved with a confidence that had never been allowed to exist in her house. As I approached, her companions grew quiet, sensing the sudden chill in the air. "Judith," I said, my voice as smooth as cream, "what a lovely surprise to see you here." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her face was turning a blotchy, unattractive shade of red. "Sarah," She finally choked out, "What are you doing here?" I took a delicate sip of my champagne and arched an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm a great admirer of the hospital's work," I said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room. "In fact, my firm is one of the lead sponsors this year." I tilted my head toward the enormous banner hanging behind the orchestra, where my company's logo was displayed in huge, brilliantly illuminated letters right beside the hospital's own. Her jaw went slack. Her eyes darted from the banner back to my face, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. I leaned in a little closer, lowering my voice to a soft, poisonous whisper meant only for her. "You threw me out of your house and called me a parasite," I murmured, a dazzling smile fixed on my face for the benefit of anyone watching. "You spent years looking down on me, completely oblivious to the fact that my little hobby was the only thing preventing your entire world from imploding. You really thought you won that morning, didn't you, Judith? You have never been more mistaken in your entire life." She was visibly trembling now, her knuckles white around the stem of her wineglass. "The divorce was finalized last week," I added, my voice turning to absolute ice. "I am finally, completely, and gloriously free of you and your son. I sincerely hope you enjoy the life you've chosen. I know I'm going to adore mine." With one last brilliant smile that held no warmth at all, I turned my back on her and walked away, leaving her there, utterly decimated in front of the very people whose approval she so desperately craved. I didn't have to look back to know I had won. The fallout, as I later heard through the grapevine, was swift and total. Without the scaffolding of my income, their financial house collapsed. Michael had to sell his beloved SUV and started working a second job as a waiter to stop the bank from foreclosing on the house. Judith had to cancel her country club membership and her weekly spa appointments. Their world, once artificially propped up by my quiet success, had shrunk to the drab, small dimensions of their own making. As for me, my world became boundless. I expanded my company, opening satellite offices in London and Singapore. I traveled to Paris, Kyoto, and Rome not for business, but just because I could. And eventually I fell in love again with a kind, brilliant man who championed my ambition and saw my strength not as a threat, but as the most incredible thing about me. I never saw Judith or Michael again. They became a cautionary tale in the story of my life, a painful chapter that forged me into the woman I was always meant to be. They were left to choke on the ashes of their choices, while I rose from them, rebuilt everything, and found myself finally and completely free.